Welcome to Starbound. My name is Chikondi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free, and it just helps make sure that our videos pop up in your feed more often. Trisha Winkley kept her eyes moving as she patrolled the promenade of Outpost 228, her boots making a satisfying click against the polished floor with each step. She'd perfected that sound over her 3 years as station security, authoritative enough to remind everyone she was watching, but not so harsh as to disrupt the festivities. And today, there were plenty of festivities to avoid disrupting. The Racian Festival of Enlightenment filled the broad corridor with a mix of species she still found dizzying, even after all this time in space. Translucent-skinned Racians mingled with hulking Urtali and skittering Aztecians, their varied forms illuminated by strings of floating lights in impossibly deep shades of blue. The scent of traditional foods wafted from stalls lining the walls, some appetizing, others that made her nose wrinkle but clearly delighted their target customers. She smiled and waved at old Mr. Zikal, the Urtali confectioner whose stall had become a regular stop on her rounds. His gray-furred face split in a broad grin as he held up one of his famous sugar crystal treats, but she shook her head. No snacking on duty, even if his candies were amazing. The gesture was interrupted by a light tap on her shoulder from her partner for the day. "Status check." Officer Prex clicked through his translator. The Aztecian's antennae waved in what she'd learned was a friendly pattern.
"All quiet,"
Trisha reported, continuing her scan of the crowd.
"Just lots of happy people enjoying—"
The words died in her throat as her eyes caught something. Someone, a Racian, moving through the crowd with... Wrong. It was wrong. She couldn't say why, but every instinct screamed danger.
"Hold that thought,"
she said, already moving. The Racian was heading down Maintenance Corridor C, restricted during festivals. But it wasn't just the unauthorized access setting off her internal alarms. Something about their gait, the way they held themselves, the almost but not quite casual glances around. She picked up her pace, staying just far enough back to avoid spooking them. The corridor curved ahead, maintenance panels lining the walls. The Racian stopped at one, hands moving to open it.
"Station security!"
Trisha called out, her voice carrying the full authority of her position.
"Step away from the panel and show me your hands!"
The Racian whirled, and Trisha's gut feeling crystallized into horrible certainty as she saw the device they were holding. Its purpose was obvious, even if she didn't recognize the exact design.
"Don't!"
she said firmly, her hand already on her stunner.
"Whatever you're planning, it's not worth it."
The would-be bomber's translucent skin pulsed rapidly with their accelerated heartbeat as they weighed their options. Trisha kept her stance relaxed but ready, giving them no obvious openings. It ended quickly after that. The Racian was skilled enough to build a bomb but had no real combat training. One attempted rush, one perfectly timed stun bolt, and it was over. As she secured their hands behind their back, she could hear Prex calling in, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid clicks. "Good catch," he managed finally as backup arrived. "But how did you know?" Trisha shrugged, watching as the bomb disposal team carefully removed the device.
"Just looked suspicious, you know?"
But even as she said it, she wondered, how had she known? The feeling had been so clear, so certain, but trying to explain it was like trying to describe the taste of water. It just was. She shook off the philosophical questions as more officers arrived to take custody of the bomber. There would be paperwork, debriefings, probably medals or commendations she didn't particularly want. But right now, she just wanted to finish her patrol and make sure everyone got to enjoy their festival in peace. Besides, she had a rain check on one of Mr. Zikal's candies to collect later. Once again, we return to our top story. The thwarted bombing attempt at yesterday's Festival of Enlightenment. The holographic news anchor's translucent form hovered above countless breakfast tables across the station. Station security officer Trisha Winkley's quick action saved potentially hundreds of lives, but her explanation has sparked controversy. The footage cut to Trisha's initial interview, her uncomfortable expression clear as cameras hovered around her.
They looked suspicious, you know? Something about how they was moving, the way they kept checking around. It didn't feel right.
But what specific behaviors triggered your response?
The interviewer pressed, antennae twitching with barely concealed frustration.
What observable signs indicated criminal intent?
There wasn't any exactly.
Trisha shifted in her seat.
It was more of a feeling, like when you know someone's watching you. You can't explain it, but you know it's true.
The station's political commentary feeds exploded. Accusations of human prejudice against Racians flooded the networks. How could she justify detaining someone based on a feeling? What if she had been wrong? But she hadn't been wrong. The evidence was irrefutable. Detailed schematics of the bomb, communications with known extremist groups, carefully planned timing to maximize casualties. The would-be bomber's guilt was never in question. The question was, how had she known? The controversy died down after 3 days of intense debate, replaced by scientific curiosity. How had a human security officer with no special training detected what automated security systems and other officers had missed? The station's governing council, eager to move past accusations of speciesism, approved an unprecedented research proposal.
This is ridiculous,
Trisha muttered, reading through the official request for her participation. The document was filled with technical language about intuitive pattern recognition and pre-conscious threat assessment, little of which made sense to her.
I was just doing my job.
But the project's prestigious nature was clear even to her. 2 of the most renowned xenoneurologists in the galaxy working together to study human cognitive processes? Even she had heard of Tyran Terrain's groundbreaking work on sapient consciousness. And while she couldn't pronounce his partner's name, everyone knew about the Aztecians' contributions to understanding different species' mental states, even though she had no idea what those contributions were, only that they'd received some kind of prize for it. The study chamber itself was impressive, a large circular room filled with equipment she didn't recognize. Her security training automatically noted the exits, the sight lines, the potential cover positions. 3 separate doors, all requiring different security clearances. Observation windows along the upper level. Climate controls that could accommodate any known species' comfort requirements. "Welcome, Officer Winkley," a calm voice spoke from one of the doorways. "We are very interested in understanding your thoughts." Pitrin Terrain carefully arranged the neural scanning equipment, watching his brother's rigid movements as Tyran calibrated each device with mathematical precision. Pitrin had known and worked with his brother his entire life, giving him an ability to anticipate his needs, a skill that made him invaluable in situations like this, where Tyran's brilliant mind struggled with the nuances of interpersonal interaction. Pitrin knew what questions to ask to get the answers Tyran wanted.
The translation delay with Ktali will be problematic,
Tyran stated without looking up from his work.
You will need to facilitate primary communication with the subject.
Of course, Pitrin agreed, having already reached the same conclusion. The Aztecian scientist was brilliant, but their natural clicking speech required complex translation for human audio ranges. "I've reviewed the preliminary protocols. Would you like me to begin the initial interview while you and Kixtali finish the calibrations?" Tyran's skin pulsed once, his version of a nod. Pitrin had learned long ago to read his brother's subtle cues, just as Tyran had learned to trust Pitrin's handling of the social aspects of their work. Though he still isn't sure how Tyran gained such control over his own heartbeat that he can pulse at will. Officer Winkley sat in the interview area, her posture suggesting both professional alertness and personal discomfort with the scientific setting. Pitrin arranged his features into what he hoped was a reassuring expression as he approached. Thank you for your participation in our study, Officer Winkley. He began, taking a seat across from her. I'd like to start with some basic questions about human neural processes, if you don't mind.
Sure, but I should warn you, I'm not exactly a scientist, she replied with a small shrug. I barely passed basic biology in school.
That's perfectly fine. We're more interested in your personal experience, Pitrin assured her, activating his data recorder. Could you describe, in your own words, how human consciousness processes information? Trisha's brow furrowed.
You mean, how we think about stuff?
Yes, exactly. For instance, when you identified the bomber, what mental steps led to your conclusion?
Honestly, no steps at all. It was just a gut feeling, you know? When you know something's wrong but you can't explain why?
Pitrin kept his expression neutral despite his confusion. Could you elaborate on this gut feeling concept? Is it a physical sensation?
Sometimes, like butterflies in your stomach, or the hair standing up on the back of your neck. But mostly it's just knowing, like how you know your own name without having to think about it.
The comparison made no logical sense. Names were learned information, while this seemed to be some form of intuitive processing. Pitrin made careful notes as Trisha continued trying to explain concepts that defied scientific categorization. And these feelings, they're reliable? He prompted.
Usually, sometimes you get false alarms, but better safe than sorry in security work.
From his workstation, Tiran's skin pulsed with barely concealed frustration at the lack of concrete data. Kuxali's antennae twitched as his translator processed the exchanges, his compound eyes fixed on their subject with obvious fascination. Perhaps, Pitrin suggested carefully, we should move on to the practical demonstrations. They may help us better understand what you're describing. Trisha nodded, clearly relieved to be done trying to explain the unexplainable.
That sounds good. Just tell me what you need me to do.
Pitrin glanced at his brother, who had finally finished his calibrations. The real work was about to begin, and somehow he suspected explaining it would be the easiest part of understanding what they were about to discover.
The interview confirms what we expected,
Tiran stated, his skin pulsing steadily as he reviewed the recorded data.
Standard questioning will yield no useful results. The subject lacks the technical vocabulary to articulate her cognitive processes.
Kuxali's antennae waved in agreement, his translator converting rapid clicks into measured words.
Indeed, though her attempts to explain were fascinating, this concept of gut feeling suggests some form of subconscious pattern recognition.
The three scientists stood around a holographic display of human neural architecture, its complexity rendering even Tiran momentarily silent. Pitrin watched his brother's subtle tells, the slight acceleration in skin pulse, the barely perceptible tilt of his head. He was already formulating theories.
We must proceed with empirical observation,
Tiran decided.
I propose a 3-phase approach.
His hands moved through the hologram with practiced precision, highlighting different neural clusters.
Phase 1. Basic pattern recognition tasks while monitoring neural activity. Simple shapes, colors, basic puzzles. Establish a baseline for conscious processing speed.
Kuxali's manipulators danced across his interface, pulling up previous studies.
Followed by complex scenario analysis, perhaps security situations the subject would be familiar with? Precisely. Phase 2 will utilize the deep scanning array.
Tiran indicated the impressive machinery dominating one side of the lab.
Full neural mapping during increasingly complex cognitive tasks. We must observe how the human brain processes unfamiliar patterns.
Pitrin studied the equipment with mild concern. The scanner is rated for human use?
The medical board approved it this morning, Kixtali confirmed, though they noted humans have rarely undergone such detailed neural scanning. Their own technology is surprisingly primitive in this area. Which leads to Phase 3, Tyran continued. Sleep state analysis.
Both Pitrin and Tali turned to him in surprise. The Astesian's antennae twitched rapidly, but it was Pitrin who questioned. Sleep state? Is that safe for the subject?
Humans require regular sleep cycles to maintain neural function,
Kixkali explained.
More importantly, even their rather unadvanced studies of it suggest some kind of cognitive function beyond mere maintenance.
Tyran's skin pulsed with barely contained excitement, the closest he came to emotional display.
Precisely why we must observe it. No other species utilizes periodic unconsciousness for cognitive enhancement. The mechanism could be key to understanding their unique capabilities.
Kixkali's manipulators moved in what Pitrin recognized as a gesture of scientific enthusiasm.
Shall we begin with Phase 1?
Tyran nodded, already moving to prepare the initial testing equipment. Pitrin watched his brother work, noting the subtle signs of his growing fascination with their subject. He had seen that look before, when Tyran sensed he was on the verge of a significant discovery. The testing chamber hummed with quiet energy as delicate sensors tracked every neural impulse in Trisha's brain. She sat comfortably in the scanning chair, various non-invasive monitoring devices arranged around her head like a loose-fitting crown. Please identify the shapes as they appear, Pitrin instructed, keeping his voice steady and professional. On the display before Trisha, simple geometric patterns began to materialize.
Circle, square, triangle, rectangle, octagon.
She named each shape casually, almost seeming bored, but the readouts told a different story.
Fascinating,
Kixtali clicked softly, his antennae twitching as he studied the data streams.
Neural recognition is occurring significantly before vocalization.
Tyran's skin pulsed rapidly as he analyzed the numbers.
Pattern identification is complete within microseconds of visual acquisition. The delay is purely in physical response time.
They progressed to color recognition, then to combined shape-color patterns. Each time, Trisha's brain recognized the correct answer almost instantly, while her conscious mind and vocal responses lagged behind by what seemed to the scientists like an eternity. Now for something more engaging, Pitrin announced, bringing up a 3-dimensional puzzle. Please solve this spatial reasoning challenge. The holographic puzzle was a complex one, requiring multiple pieces to be rotated and fitted together in specific ways. It was designed to take even highly logical species several minutes to solve. Trisha completed it in 47 seconds.
Just like those old games my kids play,
she commented with a shrug.
You know, the ones where you have to make all them pieces fit?
The scientists exchanged meaningful looks. The puzzle had been developed by a leading Rasian mathematics institute. It wasn't a toy. Final test for this phase, Pitrin said, pulling up a security simulation. Please analyze this situation and tell us how you would respond. The scenario was complex. Multiple threats, civilian presence, environmental hazards, and unclear motivations. The kind of situation that required careful analysis and consideration of numerous variables.
Oh, that's easy,
Trisha said almost immediately.
You evacuate these 3 sections first, using the maintenance corridors as emergency routes. Position officers here, here, and here to control crowd flow. The primary threat will probably try to use this ventilation shaft to escape, so you seal it off and force them towards the containment teams in Section 4. Secondary threats are mostly for distraction, so minimal force deployment there. Main thing is keeping the civilians clear of the blast radius if that device they're carrying is what I think it is.
She outlined the entire response plan with casual confidence, as if reading from a manual. But there was no manual for this scenario. It had been generated specifically for this test.
The neural pattern analysis is extraordinary,
Tyran murmured, studying the readouts.
She's processing thousands of variables simultaneously, correlating them against what must be years of accumulated experience, and generating optimal response scenarios faster than our computers can track them.
And yet, Kixtali noted, his translator struggling to keep up with his excited clicks,
she shows no sign of conscious effort, as if the complexity of the task has no bearing on processing speed.
Just common sense,
Trishard offered helpfully, apparently unaware that she had just outperformed every tactical computer ever designed. The scientists had seen enough of this phase. The results were clear, if somewhat disturbing. Whatever they had expected to find in the human brain, this level of innate pattern recognition exceeded all theoretical models, and they were just getting started. The deep scanning array made the previous testing equipment look like children's toys. Its curved panels enclosed Trisha in a cocoon of sensors and processors, each one capable of tracking neural activity down to the smallest dendrite. The machine hummed at a frequency just below conscious perception as it built a real-time map of her mental processes. "Comfortable?" Pitrin asked, monitoring her vital signs.
Like a dentist chair, but bigger,
Trisha replied.
What kind of questions are we doing now?
We'll start simple,
Tyran said, his skin pulsing steadily as he initialized the scanning sequence.
Please state your name.
Trisha Winkley.
The scientists watched in fascination as the neural map exploded with activity. What should have been a simple recall of stored information instead triggered a cascade of associated patterns, memories, emotions, self-image markers, all interwoven into a complex tapestry of meaning.
Now,
Tali clicked through his translator.
Your occupation.
Station security officer.
Again, the response unleashed a torrent of neural activity far beyond simple word association. The scanner showed her brain accessing countless stored patterns, everything from basic security protocols to specific memories of past incidents, all processing simultaneously.
Most interesting,
Tyran observed, adjusting the scanner's sensitivity.
Even at rest, her neural pattern storage appears to be actively maintaining and cross-referencing data.
They progressed to more complex questions. With each one, they watched as Trisha's mind sorted through its vast database of patterns, comparing and analyzing at speeds that shouldn't have been possible for organic computing.
Please solve this theoretical physics problem,
Tyran requested, presenting a complex scenario involving gravitational forces. Trisha frowned.
I don't know anything about physics beyond basic station safety stuff.
But the scanner told a different story. Her brain was already pulling apart the problem, breaking it down into simpler patterns it could recognize. Falling objects, circular motion, momentum. When these proved insufficient, something extraordinary happened.
Look at this,
Kixtali clicked rapidly, manipulating the display.
The neural network is generating new patterns by combining existing ones in novel configurations.
They watched as her mind created new frameworks of understanding, testing them against the problem parameters and discarding those that didn't fit. It was like watching evolution happen at the speed of thought.
Please describe your perfect vacation,
Pitrin asked, testing a different type of cognitive process. The scanner lit up with an entirely different pattern. Her brain began assembling pieces of memories, beaches she'd seen in videos, foods she'd tasted, sensations she'd experienced, and recombining them into something entirely new. The process was nearly identical to how it had approached the physics problem, but applied to purely hypothetical pleasure rather than problem-solving.
A beach resort on Earth,
she answered, unaware of the complexity her mind had just navigated.
I've never been, but I hear they're nice.
They continued through increasingly complex scenarios, watching as her mind processed each one using the same basic mechanism, pattern matching where possible, pattern generation where necessary. The implications were staggering.
Final question, Tyran announced. Please explain how you knew the bomber was suspicious.
For the first time, they watched her pattern matching fail to find a solution. Her mind cycled through thousands of stored patterns, attempted dozens of new combinations, but couldn't construct a framework that explained the intuitive leap.
I told you,
She said after a long pause.
I just knew.
Their subject's failure to explain her intuitive leap had created a paradox. Here was a mind capable of solving complex theoretical physics problems through pure pattern manipulation, even if it could not articulate the solution, yet was unable to describe its own fundamental processes.
The disparity is remarkable,
Tyran observed, his skin pulsing with uncharacteristic agitation as they reviewed the data.
By every metric, humans should be the dominant intelligence in known space. This level of neural processing power is unprecedented. Yet they show no signs of it,
Kixtali clicked thoughtfully.
Their technological development is average at best. Their social structures are often chaotic. They regularly engage in behaviors that defy logical analysis.
Pitrin watched through the observation window as Trisha stretched, clearly glad to be free of the scanning array.
Perhaps it is somehow subconscious. Like her response to the bomber,
Tyran agreed.
The pattern recognition occurred without conscious direction or understanding. Pure instinct supported by incredible processing power.
Ready for the next part? Pitrin asked their subject as she approached the discussion area.
We'd like to continue with...
Actually,
Trisha interrupted, stifling a yawn.
would it be okay if I got some sleep first? That last question about the bombers got me tussled all day. And my ma always said that if you can't figure something out, just sleep on it. She was right.
The scientists exchanged glances. The synchronicity was perfect. She'd suggested exactly what they'd planned to study next, apparently unaware of its significance.
Of course,
Tyran said, his skin pulsing with barely contained scientific excitement.
We can proceed with the sleep study immediately.
Sleep? Study?
Trisha looked uncertain.
You want to watch me sleep?
We wish to monitor your neural activity during your rest cycle,
Kixtali explained through his translator.
If you are comfortable with this.
Trisha shrugged.
Sure, I guess. Though I don't see what's so interesting about sleeping. Everyone does it.
The Aztecian's antennae twitched.
Actually, my species does not sleep at all. Many find the concept of voluntary unconsciousness quite disturbing.
Really?
Trisha looked genuinely surprised.
How do you... when do you process everything that happened during the day?
This simple question caused another rapid exchange of glances between the scientists. What did she mean by process? Perhaps referencing her species' own studies on this mysterious function of sleep? The deep scanning array hummed quietly as Trisha made herself comfortable on the specialized observation bed. The scientists had adjusted the environmental controls to what their research suggested were optimal human sleeping conditions. Temperature slightly below standard station levels, lighting dimmed to near darkness.
Just relax and sleep naturally,
Pitrin instructed, monitoring her vital signs.
The equipment will record everything automatically.
Trisha mumbled, already drifting off. The physical and mental exertion of the previous tests, or more likely, Pitrin guessed, the recent political firestorm she was at the center of, had clearly taken their toll. Within minutes, her breathing settled into the slower rhythm of early sleep. At first, the readings showed exactly what they expected, a gradual decrease in conscious neural activity as her mind prepared for rest. Tyran made notes about the orderly shutdown sequence, appreciating the logical progression. Then everything changed.
This This can't be correct,
Tyran muttered, his skin pulsing rapidly as he rechecked the scanner's calibration for the third time.
The readings suggest total neural chaos.
The displays showed activity levels that simply couldn't be correct. Rather than falling into an ordered rest state, Trisha's mind had erupted into a storm of random firing patterns. Every region of her brain was actively engaged, but with no discernible purpose or organization. Kixtali's antenna twitched violently as he analyzed the data streams.
The pattern generation we observed earlier appears to have broken free of all constraints. Her mind is creating and discarding neural connections at an impossible rate.
Look at the consciousness centers. Pitrin pointed to one particularly active cluster of readings. They're fully engaged. According to this, she's experiencing intense sensory input, sight, sound, even physical sensation. But she's completely unconscious.
Vivid hallucinations,
Tyran concluded, his clinical tone belied by his rapidly pulsing skin.
Her mind is generating complete sensory experiences with no connection to external reality.
The monitors painted a picture that grew more alarming by the second. The neural chaos wasn't limited to any specific region. Her entire brain was participating in what appeared to be a complete departure from rational thought. Memory centers fired randomly, emotional processors surged without pattern, and logic centers made connections that had no basis in reality.
The energy consumption is extraordinary,
Kixtali noted, bringing up a metabolic analysis.
Her brain is actually using more resources now than during conscious problem solving.
Tyran's fingers beat upon his console like a drum as he compared readings.
The pattern matching systems we observed earlier are still active, but they're operating without any form of filtering or constraint. It's as if her mind is trying every possible combination of stored information simultaneously.
Could this be some kind of processing error? Pitrin suggested, watching Trisha's face for any sign of distress. A malfunction in the scanning array?
3 independent monitoring systems are showing the same results,
Tyran replied.
And look at these deeper readings. The chaos appears to have structure, albeit one I don't understand. These are recurring elements, feedback loops, some kind of internal logic the computer can't decode into anything legible.
The implications slowly dawned on them. This wasn't a malfunction or an anomaly. This was normal human sleep. Every night, billions of humans voluntarily entered a state that would be considered severe psychological trauma in any other species.
The resilience required is staggering,
Kixtali clicked softly.
To regularly endure complete disconnection from reality, total neural chaos, vivid hallucinations, and then return to normal functioning, most species would suffer permanent psychological damage.
Should we wake her? Pitrin asked, genuinely concerned as the chaotic patterns intensified further. The neural activity was reaching levels that should have been impossible for organic tissue to sustain. Tyran shook his head, skin pulsing steadily now as he committed to scientific observation.
No! We must document the full cycle. Her vital signs remain stable, and historical records indicate humans can persist in this state for several hours without harm.
They watched in fascinated horror as the chaos continued to unfold. Trisha's mind, free from the constraints of consciousness, explored impossible connections and generated scenarios that defied logic. Yet her body remained peaceful, breathing steady, showing no sign of the storm raging within.
The more we learn about humans, Kixtali observed, the less we understand them. What kind of evolution would produce a species that requires regular periods of controlled madness to function?
4 hours into their observation, the chaotic pattern suddenly shifted. The seemingly random neural firing began to organize itself into more coherent rhythms, though still far more active than any normal consciousness state. The scientists, who had been maintaining a tense vigil, leaned forward in near-perfect synchronization. Activity is centralizing in the memory consolidation regions, Tyran noted, his skin pulsing with renewed interest. The pattern matching systems are becoming more orderly. Kixtrali's manipulators danced across his interface, tracking the changes.
The chaos appears to be resolving itself, as if the random connections are being tested against some internal logic.
They watched as Trisha's brain activity settled into a new configuration. While still intensely active, it now showed clear purpose, sorting, analyzing, and apparently processing the patterns generated during the earlier chaos. Look at this! Pitrin highlighted a particular cluster of readings. The neural pathways we observed during her pattern recognition tests are reactivating, but in a new configuration. Another hour passed as they documented this more organized phase. Then, just as suddenly as the first shift, everything changed again. The chaos returned in full force, but with subtle differences from the first cycle. Fascinating, Tyran breathed, his skin practically rippling with excitement. The pattern is repeating, but with variations based on the intermediate processing phase. They observed 2 complete cycles of chaos and organization before Trisha's neural patterns began showing signs of returning to consciousness. The transition was remarkably smooth, like a complex machine powering up in carefully planned stages. Her eyes opened slowly, and she stretched with casual normalcy, as if she hadn't just subjected her mind to what the scientists considered psychological torture.
Morning,
She yawned, then noticed their intense stares.
What? Did I drool or something?
How do you feel? Pitrin asked carefully, monitoring her neural activity as it settled into normal waking patterns.
Pretty good, actually.
She sat up, stretching again.
Had some nice dreams about home. My old cat was there and...
You remember the hallucinations?
Kixtali interrupted, his translator barely keeping up with his rapid clicking.
Hallucinations?
Trisha looked confused.
Nah, just regular dreams, you know? Your brain sorting through stuff while you sleep. Everyone has them.
The scientists exchanged meaningful looks. The casual way she described such an intense neural event was almost as shocking as the event itself.
Oh!
She suddenly exclaimed.
And I figured out that thing about the bomber.
All 3 scientists froze. Tyran's skin stopped pulsing entirely. You... what? Pitrin managed.
Yeah, it was bugging me, right? But while I was dreaming about my old cat, I remembered this thing from basic training. We had this instructor who always said, criminals got heartbeats too, meaning you can spot them by how they try too hard to act normal. And that's what was off about the bomber. Their heart rate was showing through their skin. You know how Ratians pulse? But it was like super controlled, like they was trying to keep it steady on purpose.
The scientists stared at her, then at their monitors, then back at her. During sleep, her mind had not only processed this previously inaccessible information, but had apparently constructed a coherent framework for understanding her own intuitive leap.
The whole dream was weird, though,
She continued, oblivious to their shock.
My cats was wearing a security uniform, and the bomber was a mouse, and there was this whole thing with floating donuts. But you know how dreams are, right?
No, Tali clicked softly. We really don't.
Tyran was already deep in the sleep cycle data, his skin pulsing rapidly as he correlated it with their earlier scans.
The pattern generation during sleep. It wasn't random. It was her mind testing every possible connection between stored patterns, unconstrained by conscious limitations.
And the organized phases between cycles, Pitrin added, understanding dawning. That was her brain sorting through the useful connections, discarding the irrelevant ones.
Like the floating donuts?
Trisha offered helpfully.
Precisely,
Tyran agreed, though he clearly had no idea what a donut was.
Your mind used the sleep state to solve a problem it couldn't process while conscious.
Well, yeah,
Trisha shrugged.
that's why people say to sleep on big decisions. Your brain figures stuff out while you're sleeping.
The casual way she described such an extraordinary process was perhaps the most extraordinary thing about it. Humans not only regularly survived periodic descents into cognitive chaos, but they had evolved to use that chaos productively. The implications were staggering.
I don't suppose, Kixtali clicked hopefully, you'd be willing to sleep through another cycle? There are several more patterns we should monitor.
Trisha laughed.
If you get me some donuts, sure. Got a craving for 'em now, though it might be a while before I'm tired again.
Vela adjusted the environmental controls in her apartment, trying to find the perfect temperature that would satisfy both her Ratian biology and her human husband's peculiar comfort requirements. As she waited for the systems to stabilize, she scrolled through the morning's scientific bulletins on her datapad. A particular headline caught her attention. Groundbreaking study reveals unique aspects of human neurology. She recognized the lead researchers' names. Tiran Terrain and Kixtali were legendary in their field. With growing interest, she began to read. The study started with a familiar incident, the prevented bombing at the Festival of Enlightenment. Vela remembered the controversy, the accusations of human prejudice that had eventually given way to scientific curiosity. Now, months later, the truth was finally being revealed.
Human neural architecture,
She read aloud, her skin pulsing with fascination.
represents one of the most sophisticated pattern recognition systems ever documented. Their brains constantly process millions of subtle environmental clues, generating responses before conscious awareness occurs.
What other species considered careful deduction, humans experienced as instant recognition. Their minds were essentially running complex probability calculations every waking moment, without any conscious effort or awareness. But it was the sleep findings that truly captured her attention. The report detailed how humans regularly experienced what any other species would consider complete psychological collapse, their minds descending into chaos every night as they processed the day's patterns.
Rather than being damaged by these experiences,
The report continued,
humans have evolved to utilize this chaos productively. During sleep, their neural networks are freed from conscious constraints, allowing for connection of patterns that might otherwise go unrecognized. This explains many documented cases of humans solving problems in their sleep or gaining new insights after rest periods.
Vela's skin pulsed rapidly as she considered the ramifications. The human mind was effectively a supercomputer that operated largely outside its owner's awareness or control. Instead of trying to manually process everything like other species, humans had evolved to simply trust their internal systems. The report's conclusion was both fascinating and mildly terrifying.
Human intelligence cannot be measured by traditional metrics because it operates on fundamentally different principles. They do not solve problems through pure logic or careful analysis, but through a complex interaction between conscious thought and subconscious pattern recognition that we are only beginning to understand.
Most striking was the final section about mental resilience. Humans didn't just survive their nightly brush with chaos, they required it to function. Their minds were adapted to regularly process what other species would consider severe psychological trauma, emerging stronger rather than damaged.
The casual way most humans approach these extraordinary capabilities,
The report noted,
suggests they are largely unaware of how unique their neural architecture is. To them, intuitive leaps, pattern recognition, and even their nightly descent into guided hallucination are simply normal parts of existence.
Vela heard the apartment door slide open as her husband returned from his morning run. After reading the report, she found herself newly fascinated by his ordinary movements. The way he automatically adjusted his stride to account for the station's slightly lower gravity. How he glanced around the room in what she now realized was an unconscious security sweep. The countless subtle calculations his mind was performing without his awareness. "Hey, love," he called out, heading for the kitchen. "You wouldn't believe the weird dream I had last night. There was this talking fish giving a lecture on quantum physics." Vella's skin pulsed with affectionate amusement.
Actually, darling, I was just reading something interesting about human dreams. Did you know your mind is essentially rebooting itself through controlled insanity every night?
"Really?" He poked his head around the corner, grinning. "Is that what they're calling it now? I just thought I had an overactive imagination." She watched him resume his morning routine, marveling at how he could be so casual about abilities that the galaxy's leading scientists found extraordinary. But then, she supposed that was part of what made humans unique. They didn't need to understand how their minds worked to use them effectively. They just needed to trust themselves, and sometimes get a good night's sleep.